February 26, 1943. Kasserine Pass, Tunisia. The Afrika Korps waited in ambush positions, confident in their Panzer IVs and the desert terrain. They believed they understood every rule of armored combat. But that morning, those rules shattered. American Sherman tanks appeared through the dust. Instead of halting to fire, their guns erupted while still in motion. Shells landed dangerously close to German positions, explosions cutting through the ridges. The panzer crews stared in disbelief. For decades, doctrine had been clear. Tanks could not hit moving targets without stopping. German gunners, trained with Zeiss optics and strict procedures, had lived by this law. Yet here were Shermans breaking it, firing while advancing. A German commander shouted over radio static, "They do not stop to aim." He assumed it was wild, desperate shooting, but as more shells struck near their lines, panic grew. The Americans were not wasting ammunition. They were hitting. Later, captured prisoners admitted their shock. One wrote in his diary, "We thought it madness, but the shells kept falling in patterns too close to ignore. Something inside their machines held their guns steady. Hidden within every Sherman was the secret. A gyroscopic stabilizer. It was no magic, no electronics, just a spinning gyroscope connected to the gun's elevation. Its task was simple: resist movement, keep the barrel level even as the tank rocked. The device was not flawless. Sherman crews still preferred to halt for precise, long-range shots. But the stabilizer allowed something unheard of: effective fire on the move. Even if accuracy was not perfect, the effect was devastating. In combat, speed and momentum mattered as much as armor. Where German tanks stopped to line up shots, Shermans kept rolling. Even partial stabilization meant the Americans could lay down suppressing fire while advancing, forcing the enemy onto the back foot. The Afrika Korps, veterans of North Africa, struggled to comprehend it. They had expected clumsy American machines. Instead, they faced tanks that seemed to glide forward, guns locked onto targets even over rough terrain. The difference was measured not only in seconds, but in survival. A Sherman firing first on the move could disable a panzer before the German crew had time to halt, aim, and return fire. Reports from German units called it unnatural. One intelligence officer noted, "Enemy tanks fired while advancing without pause. Our crews cannot replicate such actions with current equipment." What seemed like reckless gunnery was, in fact, a carefully engineered advantage. The gyro stabilizer, costing a fraction of a single shell, was rewriting armored warfare in ways the Germans never anticipated. For the German crews trapped in Kasserine's dust, it was a revelation born in fire. Shermans did not just outnumber them. They fought by rules no German manual had prepared them for. And that morning, for the first time, German soldiers realized that American tanks carried secrets hidden deep inside their turrets, secrets that tilted the battlefield itself. In the days after Kasserine, rumors spread quickly among captured German soldiers. Some whispered that the Americans had automatic aiming devices. Others insisted it was only reckless fire, but doubts lingered. Too many had seen the same impossible thing. When damaged, Shermans were captured intact. German engineers crowded around them. They expected crude machinery, nothing the Reich's industry couldn't replicate. Instead, they discovered something entirely foreign: a compact gyroscope mounted beneath the gun cradle. It looked unimpressive, no larger than a steel drum. Yet, as technicians spun it manually, they felt its resistance. The barrel, linked by gears and hydraulics, fought against motion. The device resisted every bump, every shake, keeping the gun steady. An engineer scribbled in his notes, "A child's toy, yet ingenious." Why have we not thought of this? The irony stung. Germany had pioneered precision optics, but never considered stabilizing the gun itself. POWs recalled how their officers scoffed. Many called it a gimmick. Unnecessary complexity in battle. They argued that a well-trained German crew could achieve accuracy by halting and firing properly. But those who had faced Shermans knew better. One prisoner, a panzer gunner, told his interrogators, "They moved like hunters. We could not match them. Even if their first shot missed, the second came before we had even fired once." The Americans, for their part, rarely spoke of the stabilizer. Many crews undertrained in its use, sometimes even turned it off. But for those who mastered it, the advantage was undeniable. It allowed them to close distance without surrendering firepower. German engineers dismantled the captured unit piece by piece. What astonished them most was its simplicity. No electronics, no exotic alloys, just clever mechanics refined by American industry. And it was standardized. Every Sherman had one. Reports sent back to Berlin carried a tone of disbelief. Enemy tanks possess a stabilization device for their main gun. It is crude but effective. We lack such equipment entirely. But by then, it was too late. German factories, strained under Allied bombing, could not redesign tanks mid-war. The gyrostabilizer remained a uniquely American edge, born not of genius alone, but of mass production. For the prisoners of war in their camps, the revelation spread like wildfire. Men who had cursed the Sherman's accuracy now whispered that the enemy had machines that fight for them. It was half joke, half truth, but always tinged with respect. They realized that what seemed like chaos on the battlefield had been order disguised in technology. The Shermans were not lucky. They were prepared in ways German doctrine had never imagined. And in the quiet of captivity, many admitted the same uneasy thought. If America could put such machines into every tank, what other surprises might still be hidden in their war machine? The gyrostabilizer was no longer just a curiosity. It was a symbol, the proof that the Americans were willing to solve problems in ways Germany had never dared. On paper, the Panzer IV outclassed the Sherman. Its high-velocity 75-millimeter gun punched through armor the Sherman struggled to match. German optics, built by Zeiss and Leitz, were the finest in the world. But war was not fought on paper. Sherman crews learned that their stabilizers gave them one crucial edge: speed. Instead of halting to take every shot, they could fire while advancing, keeping momentum on their side. It was not perfect accuracy, but it was enough to suppress the enemy. In training grounds across the American desert, gunners drilled in firing while moving. They learned that the stabilizer wouldn't guarantee a first-round hit, but it would keep shells landing close enough to pin down the enemy until they closed the distance. German crews were astonished when reports reached them. Their doctrine demanded precision, perfection, and control. Stopping before every shot was considered discipline. But this discipline cost time, and in battle, time was death. One POW later described the shock. "We stopped, we aimed, we fired. They moved, they fired again. By the time we adjusted, the next shell was already in flight." The gyrostabilizer changed how Americans thought about gunnery. They no longer relied solely on ambush or defensive lines. Instead, they pushed forward, overwhelming enemies with constant pressure. Even near misses were victories if they forced Germans to duck or lose aim. Sherman units began using fire-on-the-move tactics to disrupt German coordination. While panzers waited for command tanks to issue orders, American units pressed forward, each tank able to act independently yet in sync. Battlefield reports spoke of this strange aggression. A German officer wrote after Sicily, Their tanks do not fight like ours. They fight as though the ground does not matter. They advance and shoot without hesitation. The stabilizer had given American armor the freedom to improvise. Where German formations demanded rigid precision, American tanks fought with flexibility, adapting moment by moment. For German soldiers watching their comrades fall back under this new kind of assault, the effect was more than tactical. It was psychological. They had believed their tanks superior, but now the enemy fought by rules they had never studied. To the POWs reflecting behind barbed wire, the truth grew clearer. The Americans had not just matched German technology, they had rewritten the very rhythm of armored warfare. And the tiny gyroscope, spinning unseen inside every Sherman turret, was the silent engine of that transformation. For German soldiers, it was a bitter realization. The Americans had turned movement itself into a weapon, and that weapon could not be unlearned once seen. When captured Shermans were first examined, German engineers scoffed. They called the stabilizer unnecessary, a toy unworthy of serious armored doctrine. To them, precision came from discipline, not machinery. Reports sent back to Berlin carried this tone of arrogance. One officer wrote, "The Americans burden their tanks with needless complexity. A well-trained crew renders such contraptions useless." This dismissal echoed the confidence of the Panzerwaffe. After all, Germany's optics were unmatched, its crews highly trained. They trusted skill, not gadgets, to win battles. But frontline soldiers knew better. Tankers who faced the Shermans whispered about their strange ability to shoot while moving. In POW camps, men admitted, "We thought them reckless." Then we saw the results. Their fire was not wild. It was guided. The stabilizer's design only deepened the insult. It was simple, just a spinning gyroscope linked to hydraulics. No genius breakthrough, no exotic material, only clever engineering, mass-produced by American industry. For German engineers, the humiliation was sharp. The Reich had poured resources into advanced weapons, Tiger tanks, 88mm guns, jet fighters. Yet here was a small, inexpensive device that gave American Shermans an edge where it mattered most: battlefield tempo. At first, Wehrmacht officers dismissed reports from their own soldiers. They claimed the Americans fired blindly, wasting ammunition. But over time, patterns emerged. Too many units reported the same shock, the same unsettling accuracy of moving Shermans. One intelligence report from Italy admitted reluctantly, "The enemy possesses a stabilizing device in their tanks. It allows gunnery under movement, though imperfectly. We lack such equipment." By then, the war had shifted. German factories strained under Allied bombing, unable to retool production for a device they had once mocked. The chance to respond was gone. Inside POW barracks, the soldiers replayed these contradictions. They had been told the Sherman was inferior, a coffin on tracks. Yet in battle, they saw something their own tanks could not do. Some clung to pride, insisting it was only numbers that gave the Americans victory. Others, quieter, admitted that technology mattered as much as bravery. The stabilizer became a symbol of American ingenuity, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in effect. What the Reich dismissed as a gimmick had turned into one of the battlefield's most disruptive secrets. For German POWs, the irony was bitter. Their own command had laughed at the idea until the laughter was buried under the thunder of advancing Shermans. And by then, it was far too late to catch up. To the naked eye, the gyro stabilizer looked unimpressive, a steel cylinder tucked beneath the gun mount, humming faintly when engaged. But inside, it housed the secret that stunned the Germans. At its heart was a spinning wheel, rotating at thousands of revolutions per minute. Like a child's toy top, it resisted motion. When the Sherman lurched forward or rocked over rough ground, the gyroscope fought against the movement. That resistance was transferred through hydraulic controls to the gun itself. The barrel, instead of bouncing wildly with every bump, stayed steadier, long enough for gunners to keep their sights close to the target. It did not make Sherman's snipers on the move. Accuracy still suffered at long range. But at medium distances, 300 to 800 meters, the difference was decisive. Even one hit sooner could decide who survived. Captured German engineers who examined the unit shook their heads. It was not complex electronics, not cutting-edge physics, but practical mechanics. Simple, reliable, and, most critically, produced in the tens of thousands. Reports described it in dry language. Enemy tank gun stabilization device. Gyroscopic in nature. Crude in appearance, but functional. But behind those words lay astonishment that the Americans had fielded such a system universally. For German tank crews, the technical explanation only deepened the shock. They had been taught to trust their optics, their steady hands, their discipline. Now they realized the Americans had given every gunner a tool that multiplied his effectiveness. In POW camps, the rumors grew more elaborate. Some claimed the Americans had automatic aiming. Others said their tanks fought like machines possessed. But the truth was subtler. The gyroscope gave confidence. It allowed men to do what their doctrine forbade: shoot while moving. American crews described it simply. One recalled in an interview, "It kept the gun from jumping like a mule." That's all. It gave us the chance to land a shot while rolling. For German soldiers, the simplicity was almost insulting. Their industry had pursued massive innovations: rockets, jets, giant tanks. The Americans, meanwhile, had quietly improved the basics of gunnery with a device the size of a bread box. And because it was standardized, every Sherman carried it. Not just command tanks, not just elite units, but every crew from Africa to Italy to Normandy. The science was simple. The impact was revolutionary. What looked like a modest gyroscope had changed the way battles unfolded, one steady gun barrel at a time. For German POWs reflecting later, the lesson was inescapable. It wasn't always the biggest guns or thickest armor that won battles. Sometimes it was the smallest machine hidden deep in the turret, and that realization haunted them long after the fighting ended. American tank crews were not always impressed when first introduced to the stabilizer. Many found it difficult to master. Others distrusted its humming machinery beneath the gun. Some even switched it off, preferring to fight by instinct. But those who learned to use it soon discovered its value. One gunner from the 2nd Armored Division recalled, "It didn't make you perfect, but it made you faster. Your sight picture stayed steady long enough to squeeze a shot. In practice, that meant Shermans could advance aggressively, keeping their enemies under constant pressure. A moving tank that fired, even imperfectly, was far more dangerous than one forced to stop and expose itself." German observers thought it was recklessness. After the battles in Sicily, one Wehrmacht report scoffed, "The Americans waste ammunition without discipline, firing on the move like cavalry." But their prisoners told another story. POWs who had faced the Shermans admitted that the wasted fire still landed dangerously close, suppressing their gunners and forcing panzer crews to duck inside their turrets. Suppression meant survival, even before a shell found its mark. For American crews, the stabilizer also meant confidence. They no longer hesitated to return fire while closing distance. Even if the first shot missed, the second would be steadier, and the third deadlier still. A tank commander from Normandy explained it best. "Without it, you felt blind when moving. With it, you felt like you had a fighting chance, even under fire. German POWs, listening to such accounts, shook their heads in disbelief. They had been told the Americans were crude and untrained. Instead, they found a force that trusted its machines as much as its men. In captivity, some argued it was unfair, that technology, not courage, had tipped the scales. But others admitted that courage meant nothing if the first shot tore through your armor before you could stop and aim. The stabilizer was no miracle weapon, but it allowed Sherman crews to fight differently, to keep moving, to keep firing, to keep momentum alive. That difference, multiplied across thousands of tanks, changed entire battles. For the Germans, who had dismissed it as wasteful bravado, the truth became clear only too late. What they mistook for recklessness was actually discipline of a new kind, one written not in manuals but in gears and spinning steel. American crews knew the device had its limits, but they also knew it was something their enemies lacked. That knowledge was a weapon of its own. For German POWs, hearing these first-hand testimonies in interrogations and later reading reports, the message was unmistakable. The Americans had trusted innovation where Germany had trusted tradition, and on the battlefield, innovation had won. The gyro-stabilizer had transformed not just machines, but the mindset of the men inside them. When German engineers first studied captured Shermans, they recognized the gyro-stabilizer's function, but their reaction was not admiration. It was dismissal. Reports labeled it unnecessary complexity, a gadget unsuited for the precision demanded by Panzer doctrine. At design bureaus in Berlin, some engineers argued that such devices would only distract crews. They claimed that highly trained German gunners didn't need mechanical aids, that discipline and optics alone secured victory. But frontline officers were less certain. They had seen the chaos of Shermans firing on the move, forcing their own tanks to halt under fire. They asked, could German tanks match this? The answer, unfortunately for them, was no. Production was already stretched thin. Allied bombing crippled factories, and every resource went into churning out new tanks, not retooling for new technology. Even if the stabilizer could be copied, Germany lacked the capacity to mass produce it. Instead, the Wehrmacht relied on heavier armor and bigger guns, the Tiger and Panther. These giants dominated in duels, but they were few in number and slow to build. The stabilizer's advantage was not in one-on-one battles, but in thousands of Shermans pressing forward together. Some panzer crews tried to adapt tactics. They dug in, ambushed, and used terrain to negate moving fire. But even then, the Sherman's suppressive volleys made it harder to return accurate fire. The gyro-stabilizer tilted every engagement, even before the first hit. Prisoners later admitted the frustration. One panzer commander recalled, "It was like fighting men who refused to stop running. They were always moving, always firing. We could not slow them down." By 1944, whispers in POW camps revealed an uncomfortable truth. While Germany had invested in innovation for prestige, rockets, jets, monstrous tanks, America had innovated where it mattered most, inside the machines already in battle. The Reich's failure was not only technical, but strategic. They dismissed the stabilizer as a toy. The Americans, by contrast, treated it as a tool, refining it, training with it, and multiplying it across their entire armored force. In the end, no German countermeasure ever came. No equivalent device was fielded, no redesign introduced. The Wehrmacht faced a technology it refused to believe in until it was too late. And so, battle after battle, the same pattern repeated. Shermans kept moving, kept firing, kept pressing forward. Panzer crews, left with only optics and discipline, could not match the pace. For the prisoners of war who lived through it, the lesson was bitter. Germany had underestimated not just American numbers, but American ingenuity. And in dismissing the gyrostabilizer, they had ignored the very device that turned momentum into America's most lethal weapon. It was a mistake that echoed in every defeat that followed. June 6, 1944. The beaches of Normandy erupted with fire as American Shermans rolled off landing craft under a storm of artillery. German defenders believed the chaos would neutralize the enemy's tanks. But as the Shermans pressed inland, their stabilizers revealed their quiet power. In the bocage countryside, hedgerows turned every lane into a deadly ambush. German infantry, armed with Panzerfaust, waited for Shermans to halt before firing, but many never stopped. With gyro stabilizers engaged, their guns barked while moving, forcing German soldiers to scatter. For Allied commanders, the ability to suppress while advancing proved decisive. Every second a Sherman fired on the move was a second German gunners lost their aim. Even near misses shattered nerves, breaking ambushes before they could succeed. Reports from the First Army noted how tank crews used their stabilizers to provide rolling barrages of fire, supporting infantry as they pushed through the maze of fields. Where German doctrine demanded precision from stationary guns, American units traded perfection for momentum. One captured German officer described the shock. They did not pause. They drove forward, their shells bursting against the hedges. We could not aim before another came. By late June, as the Americans broke out from the beaches, the pattern was clear. Sherman units coordinated with infantry, artillery, and even naval guns, all while staying mobile. Their stabilizers allowed them to remain part of the fight, never waiting, never static. For German defenders, this constant movement created the impression of endless numbers. In reality, it was the illusion of momentum, the stabilizer making every Sherman seem more aggressive than it was. During Operation Cobra in July, the Americans unleashed armored divisions across open ground. German tank crews were stunned as Shermans advanced at speed, firing continuously. To them it seemed reckless, but the stabilizers made it survivable. After the breakout, POW interrogations revealed their confusion. Many still clung to the belief that Americans wasted ammunition, but others admitted, "We realized then, that their machines gave them confidence to fight differently." It was not waste, it was strategy. By the time France began to fall, the lesson was undeniable. The gyro stabilizer was not a gimmick. It was part of a system, a philosophy of mobility, firepower, and relentless pressure that Germany could not counter. POWs who had once mocked the device now whispered about it as a symbol of America's hidden advantages. They had thought themselves masters of armored warfare. Now they were forced to admit the Americans had rewritten the rule book. In Normandy's hedgerows and France's fields, the gyro stabilizer turned every Sherman into more than just a tank. It became a machine of momentum, a weapon of persistence that no Panzer doctrine could contain. For German soldiers, the shock was not only in defeat, but in realizing that a small spinning wheel inside every turret had helped shape the fate of Europe. And in their captivity, many would dwell on that bitter irony. By late 1944, thousands of German tankers found themselves behind barbed wire in American camps. For the first time, they had time to reflect, not just on battles lost, but on why they had been lost. And the gyro stabilizer became a frequent subject of whispered debate. In the barracks, men argued over what they had seen. Some clung to pride, insisting it was American numbers that mattered, not technology. "They drowned us in steel," one officer muttered, but others shook their heads. They had fought Shermans and seen how they fired while moving. numbers alone did not explain it. The device itself, when described to those who had never handled it, sounded trivial. Just a gyroscope, a child's toy scaled up, bolted beneath a cannon. But those who faced it swore by its effect. "You cannot know," one panzer gunner said, "until you sit in a tank that is firing back at you without stopping." Prisoners compared it to Germany's own innovations: rockets, jet fighters, and monstrous tiger tanks, all symbols of prestige. Yet these machines were rare, too costly, too slow to build. Meanwhile, America had placed its innovation not in the extraordinary, but in the ordinary, inside every Sherman that rolled off the line. Some POWs admitted this was the true shock. The stabilizer was not reserved for elite units. It was standard, universal, expected. Every American crew had one, and that meant every American tank fought with the same advantage. Letters intercepted from prisoners of war to their families revealed their grudging respect. One wrote, "We laughed at their tanks. We no longer laugh. They fight with machines we did not believe possible." Others described the irony bitterly. They had mocked the Sherman as a Tommy Cooker, vulnerable to 8s. Yet those same Shermans, lighter and weaker on paper, had beaten them in practice by refusing to stop moving. The stabilizer became a metaphor in the camps, a symbol of what separated American and German industry. Germany had genius, but lacked mass production. America had both. At night, in long conversations over thin coffee, some POWs admitted the hardest truth. The war was lost not just because of overwhelming numbers, but because of overwhelming systems. Systems that could build and equip every tank with devices Germany could not even copy. For some, it was a humiliation. For others, it was almost a relief. They had fought bravely, they told themselves, but they had faced an enemy whose machines gave them powers beyond human skill. And in those reflections, behind the wire, many German soldiers realized the gyrostabilizer was not a gimmick. It was proof that the enemy had been fighting a different war all along, one built on technology, production, and quiet revolutions hidden deep inside their tanks. The POWs could not change their fate, but they could not forget what they had seen either. The memory of Shermans firing while moving would stay with them long after the barbed wire was gone. For in that simple machine, they glimpsed the secret of America's war, a belief that progress, multiplied across thousands, could change the battlefield itself. And that realization lingered long after their defeat. By the final months of the war, the gyrostabilizer was no longer a battlefield secret. German engineers knew of it, Allied crews trusted it, and countless POWs had spoken of it in disbelief. Yet its true legacy was only beginning. When American tank crews returned home, many admitted its flaws. It was difficult to master, sometimes poorly maintained, and often underestimated even by their own side. But for those who used it properly, the stabilizer had saved lives. For Germany, the lesson was harsher. Soldiers who had dismissed it as a gimmick now knew it had tipped battles. In POW camps, they muttered with frustration, "If we had such devices, perhaps Kasserine would have ended differently." Historians later confirmed the truth. The stabilizer did not make the Sherman invincible. Tigers and Panthers still destroyed them in duels. But war was not fought tank against tank. It was fought army against army. And across thousands of Shermans, the stabilizer gave an edge Germany could not erase. In the post-war years, every major tank-producing nation studied the concept. Britain and the Soviet Union rushed to adopt stabilizers in their new designs. By the 1950s, no serious tank went to battle without some form of gun stabilization. The device Germany had laughed at had become a global standard. What began as a toy hidden inside Shermans became the foundation for modern tank fire control systems, eventually leading to the fully stabilized, computer-guided guns of today. For German veterans, the memory remained sharp. In memoirs and interviews, many spoke not of the Tiger's might or the Panther's armor, but of the shock of seeing Shermans firing on the move. It was a moment when their pride in superior machines faltered. One former Panzer commander confessed years later, "We believed only in strength of armor and precision of optics, but they believed in progress, and progress defeated us." The irony was cruel. Germany had pioneered armored warfare with radios and blitzkrieg tactics. Yet it was America that had quietly advanced the art with a spinning wheel of steel, mass-produced in factories far from the battlefield. POWs who returned home carried that memory like a scar. They told families and fellow veterans how the Americans had fought with machines, unlike anything in German doctrine. Many could not bring themselves to admit it publicly, but privately they acknowledged the truth. The gyro stabilizer had not only changed the battlefield, it had changed their understanding of war itself, because in the end it was not always the biggest gun or the thickest armor that decided victory. Sometimes it was the smallest invention, hidden inside the turret of an ordinary tank, that shaped the outcome of history. And for the German POWs who once faced Shermans across the deserts, fields, and hedgerows of war, the memory of those moving, firing tanks remained unforgettable. The gyroscope kept spinning in their minds long after the war had ended.